It brings heartbreaking sadness to know I played a big part in her fear, worry, and loneliness. The day started like any normal day inside Buckingham Palace's famous walls. But just 7 minutes ago, something broke that peaceful routine. A sudden, shocking announcement sent waves of surprise through the royal hallways, stopping workers in their tracks and shutting down centuries-old traditions. It wasn't a small change or a normal update. This was different. This was huge. For the first time in decades, uncertainty hung over the monarchy's future like a coming storm. Before we dig deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Inside the palace, even the smallest things showed a sense of worry. Palace workers, usually used to the steady rhythm of royal life, noticed early signs that something big was happening. The phones, normally busy but manageable, rang non-stop as assistants passed along urgent messages. Top advisors moved quickly between rooms, their faces tight with hidden concern. Their conversations cut down to rushed whispers. These were not the normal scheduled changes of a royal day. They were signs of an internal shakeup building under the surface. Outside, the first clues showed up in the form of sleek black cars arriving unusually early. Their dark windows concealed people carrying sealed envelopes, symbols of high-level talks, legal considerations, or, as some suspected, an emergency order from the king himself. Messengers moved with precision, delivering their packages before disappearing as quickly as they had come. The palace gates, normally a place of calm ceremony, became a revolving door for the kingdom's most powerful insiders. People with long memories remembered similar patterns during past royal crises and whispered almost fearfully that history might be getting ready to repeat itself. Then came the balcony. Known around the world as the monarchy's most lasting symbol of stability, it stayed eerily empty. Normally, in the early hours, staff would be seen checking its structure or arranging routine details in preparation for upcoming appearances. But no one appeared that day. The emptiness of that balcony sent a chill through those who know how carefully every royal ritual is kept up. In the royal world, silence can speak louder than any announcement. And that silence now hangs over Buckingham like an approaching storm. Long-serving palace workers, whose instincts had been sharpened by decades of watching history from behind golden doors, began exchanging worried looks. Many admitted later that they hadn't felt this level of tension since the days around Queen Elizabeth II's death. There was something about the rhythm of the palace, the quickened steps, the quiet urgency, the deliberate absence of the familiar that signaled something far bigger than a scheduling change. They could feel the weight of an unspoken truth. Meanwhile, the media stationed outside caught on to these subtle shifts with practiced eyes. Security teams adjusted their patterns, clearing areas they normally ignored. Scheduled public appearances disappeared from official schedules without explanation. Rumors began to move through the crowd like sparks catching dry wood. Veteran royal reporters compared notes and quickly agreed. Something important, perhaps historic, was happening. It wasn't a question of if an announcement was coming. It was a matter of when and how devastating its impact would be. In the middle of this quiet chaos, a chilling realization began to take hold among those closest to the institution. The movements were too coordinated, the absences too deliberate, the silence too thick. This was not the unfolding of an ordinary day. This was the early shake before a massive royal shift. Whispers spread rapidly through hallways and press rooms alike. A huge decision was on the edge of breaking. And when it did, the monarchy's path would never look the same again. But the silence didn't last long. Behind closed doors, whispers turned into strategic moves, and the first hints of the king's stunning decision began to appear. Witnesses say King Charles showed up earlier than usual, but avoided photographers, speaking to no one. His normally warm nods were replaced by distant stares. His steps slower, almost weighted down. For weeks, rumors had circled about his state of mind and growing internal pressures. But this morning, those whispers took shape. The monarch had pulled back deep into the palace's private wing. A move insiders say only happens before history-changing announcements. Within the palace, his sudden change in routine set off quiet alarms among those who understand the language of royal behavior. Normally, the king begins his day with well-established public gestures. A brief wave to staff, a few carefully chosen words to photographers. A measured display of stability that reassures both insiders and watchers alike. But not today. Charles skipped every familiar stop, walking past assistants and security without a single acknowledgement, heading straight toward a hidden room near the picture gallery. Those who saw it described not the confident walk of a monarch at work, but the deliberate, heavy steps of a man carrying something far greater than the duties of the day. Close assistants were called urgently, their movements sharp and unusually tense. These were not routine morning meetings. One by one, senior advisors disappeared into the king's rooms. Their faces serious, their conversations reduced to hushed exchanges in hallway corners. A select few clutched thick old folders, the kind used only in matters of legal weight or succession planning. For staff members watching from the sidelines, this was a chilling sign. Whenever the past is brought out in ink and paper, it is because the future is being rewritten. Inside his private rooms, Charles stayed isolated for hours. Sources later described him as thoughtful, withdrawn, pacing slowly, then pausing to stare at documents spread before him. It was as though he was silently practicing a decision he could no longer put off. For months, whispers about his health and emotional stress had been dismissed as idle chatter. But on this morning, his isolation felt deliberate, almost ceremonial. A preparation for something that couldn't be reversed. Even his private secretary was not called immediately. Those who know him best understood that this was the king's way of facing a burden alone, before allowing the machinery of monarchy to set it in motion. Adding to the growing worry was Queen Camilla's sudden absence from all public-facing duties. There were no statements, no alternative events, no believable explanations. Her silence became a story of its own. For a person who has carefully built her presence alongside Charles, her withdrawal at such a critical moment raised more questions than answers. Was she stepping back by choice, or had the inner circle decided her presence might complicate what was unfolding? No one outside that private wing knew. And that uncertainty only deepened the sense of something huge brewing behind closed doors. Senior courtiers, normally the calm keepers of royal routine, struggled to hide their worry. Some were spotted exchanging tense whispers, others moving through hallways with documents pressed tightly to their chests as if protecting the contents from curious eyes. Rumors began to ripple through staff communication channels with increasing strength. One phrase repeated in hushed tones sent shivers through the ranks. Something's being written, something final. In the palace, those words carry a weight all their own. They speak not of minor adjustments, but of announcements that change the shape of history. As hours passed, the king's retreat took on the feeling of a turning point. A moment when the future was being quietly decided by a single person behind ancient doors. And as Charles pulled further from public view, another royal figure quietly began to step forward, signaling a generational shift that no one was supposed to notice yet. In the king's absence, two familiar figures appeared. Prince William and Princess Catherine arrived at the palace far earlier than scheduled. Their expressions serious, their pace deliberate. Gone were the warm smiles and easy gestures the public knew so well. This was the look of heirs, stepping into unknown territory. The hallway stirred with quiet acknowledgement. Power, it seemed, was shifting faster than anyone had expected. William's entrance set the tone. Those who saw him noted a striking focus, an intensity rarely seen outside of major state occasions. He carried a set of briefing papers close to his chest, moving with purpose toward the inner hallways. This was not the casual arrival of a royal fulfilling daily tasks. This was the calculated stride of a man aware that the balance of authority was quietly tilting in his direction. For months, whispers had circulated about his growing role behind the scenes. But on this day, those whispers turned into undeniable reality. Moments later, Catherine followed. Her manner, as always, carried grace, but beneath that calm exterior was unmistakable strength. She greeted staff with brief, composed nods, giving off both reassurance and quiet power. Her presence alone seemed to steady the atmosphere, reminding everyone of the couple's increasingly central role in shaping the monarchy's future. Together, their arrival sent a clear signal. The next generation was no longer waiting in the wings. They were stepping onto the main stage. Their destination left no room for doubt. Both William and Catherine made their way directly to the same secure meeting room where King Charles had hidden himself earlier. No press access, no leaks. Only a tightly controlled circle of advisors was allowed inside. Whatever conversations unfolded in that room were meant to stay behind sealed doors. But palace insiders could feel the seriousness. This was the meeting point between a fading reign and an emerging force. Senior advisors who had spent years circling Charles's inner circle began subtly redirecting communication lines away from Clarence House toward Kensington Palace. This was more than a procedural shift. It was symbolic. Information, influence, and strategic coordination were quietly flowing toward the younger couple. It wasn't done with ceremony, but with careful precision, as if the palace itself was instinctively turning toward its future power base. Those watching closely recognized the importance of these quiet adjustments. They signaled a new operational center forming in real time. Amid this subtle realignment, one project rose to prominence. The Diana Initiative, long discussed behind closed doors. It represented more than just charity. It was a vision, a strategic merging of the monarchy's emotional legacy with modern leadership by bringing back the values that defined Princess Diana's connection to the public. Empathy, accessibility, and moral courage. William and Catherine were positioning themselves not merely as successors, but as reformers, ready to carry the crown into a new era. Palace staff began to speak of it not as an idea, but as something that would definitely happen. Insiders whispered that the couple was preparing for the storm ahead. They weren't waiting for formal announcements. They were building the framework for a monarchy that could withstand whatever revelations the king's withdrawal would soon unleash. Every meeting they held, every decision they made carried the weight of planning ahead, and a recognition that the coming days would define their roles for decades to come. But while the younger royals organized their approach, the king's private discussions took on a much darker and more decisive tone. As the palace slept, a midnight meeting unfolded in the king's private study. Only a handful of the most trusted people were present. Those inside described the atmosphere as unlike anything in recent memory. In hushed tones, King Charles began to speak not as a monarch giving commands, but as a man facing his limits. What followed wasn't a discussion. It was a confession, one that would reshape the monarchy forever. Behind the locked doors of his private room, the king addressed a select circle. Senior advisors, legal assistants, and Prince William. These were the individuals who had stood beside him through transitions, crises, and coronations. Yet even they sensed this night was different. There was a seriousness to Charles's presence, a weight in his words that stripped away the royal exterior and revealed something far more human. A man facing the limits of power, time, and legacy. He began by speaking slowly, acknowledging what many had whispered but few dared say out loud. He spoke of the weight of centuries pressing upon his shoulders, a burden that had grown heavier with every passing month of his reign. His health, though carefully guarded from public scrutiny, had become an unspoken factor within palace walls. For a man raised to represent continuity, the creeping realization that his own endurance might not match the expectations of the crown cut deeply. His voice, usually composed and measured, carried a rare shake that held the room in absolute silence. Then, in a moment that shifted the tone entirely, Charles revealed that this gathering was not spontaneous. For months, he had been quietly working on a backup plan, one that involved significant legal adjustments designed to protect the monarchy's stability. This was not about ceremonial gestures. It was about structural change. Those present were stunned to learn that the framework for this transition was not a recent idea born of panic, but a carefully considered path he had been building in the shadows. His confession deepened as he expressed his greatest fear that without swift and deliberate action, the monarchy might break apart under the weight of modern pressures, internal divisions, and generational shifts. The institution he had spent his life defending, modernizing, and preserving could fall apart if leadership did not adapt with precision. His words carried both urgency and sadness, as though he were acknowledging that his reign might ultimately be defined not by what he achieved, but by what he chose to let go. Then came the sentence that chilled the room. He paused, looked at those gathered, and said, "The future may not have me in it." The impact was immediate. Advisors shifted uneasily. William held his composure, but the magnitude of what his father was hinting at was unmistakable. This wasn't a symbolic statement. It was an acknowledgement of a coming reality. The king was not merely planning for the future. He was preparing to step aside in a way no one had expected so soon. Before the meeting ended, the outline of the plan was set. Plans for an unprecedented royal broadcast were finalized. It would be a direct address from the monarch to the nation and the world. Unlike anything in living memory, every word, every gesture would carry enormous historical weight. The message had to be clear, decisive, and unshakable. By the time the discussion ended, those inside knew the countdown had begun. But before dawn broke, not everyone inside the palace agreed on the king's course of action, and some were prepared to push back. Queen Camilla's unexplained disappearance from the day's events sent ripples through the palace. But one person refused to retreat into the shadows. Princess Anne, known for her unshakable duty, Anne began attending closed meetings uninvited, pressing advisors for clarity. Behind her calm exterior was a brewing storm. She had no intention of allowing the monarchy's foundations to be rewritten without a fight. Camilla's absence was no mere scheduling mistake. She quietly pulled out from multiple events without offering a formal explanation, leaving both the public and the palace to wonder. There were no substitute appearances, no carefully worded press statements, and no attempts to fill the gap her absence created. For someone who had spent years carefully crafting her public presence, this sudden silence was deafening. Her retreat sparked a wave of speculation that reached every corner of royal life. It wasn't just a missed appearance. It was a vanishing act at the most critical moment in the monarchy's modern history. Her allies, once confident fixtures in palace communications, found themselves pushed aside. Media coverage that typically highlighted Camilla's charity work and soft power influence began to fade. Stories that once subtly reinforced her role as queen consort were replaced by stories focused on William, Catherine, and the emerging future of the monarchy. This shift wasn't coincidental. Within royal circles, coverage patterns are often deliberate signals of power dynamics. Camilla's shrinking visibility suggested an internal recalibration, one that didn't favor her. Amid this quiet power vacuum, Princess Anne made her move. Normally content to operate within well-defined boundaries, Anne began appearing in key closed-door discussions uninvited. Her presence was neither loud nor dramatic. It was deliberate, calculated, and commanding. Advisors used to her quiet efficiency found themselves facing pointed questions. about the king's backup plans and the pace of legal changes. Anne's tone carried the authority of someone who had spent her entire life protecting the monarchy's core traditions. She was not there to observe. She was there to make it clear that this sudden acceleration of change would not go unchallenged. Even in public, Anne's gestures became unmistakable. At formal ceremonies where every movement is choreographed to signal unity, she made subtle but firm choices that spoke volumes. Courtiers noticed her withholding the small, customary gestures of respect that usually reinforced Camilla's presence. These weren't obvious acts of defiance, but quiet signals of disapproval, visible only to those who understood royal language. They were the actions of a woman who had spent decades watching palace politics and who now chose her moment to step in. The tension between Anne and Camilla had deep roots. It wasn't born overnight. Their relationship stretched back to the complicated dynamics of the 1970s, evolving through years of polite distance and mutual calculation. While Camilla rose through the ranks, reshaping her public image with patience and resilience, Anne remained the monarchy's unwavering pillar. A woman who had built her reputation not on charm or reinvention, but on relentless duty. That contrast had always been there, simmering beneath the surface. But now, with Camilla's sudden withdrawal and Charles's unprecedented decisions looming, those quiet rivalries resurfaced with sharpened edges. Anne's involvement added an unexpected twist to the unfolding royal drama. She represented tradition, stability, and continuity, qualities that stood in stark contrast to the rapid changes being set in motion by Charles and quietly embraced by William and Catherine. Her presence in these discussions served as a reminder that the monarchy was not a single voice, but a collection of power centers, each with its own vision for the institution's survival. By inserting herself into the heart of the decision-making process, Anne became the traditionalist counterweight to Charles's modernizing push, ensuring that his plans would not go unexamined. As the palace divided between caution and change outside its gates, the world began to sense that something historic was approaching. By the time the sun rose over London, speculation had exploded. News vans surrounded Buckingham Palace. Journalists pieced together fragments of insider whispers. Social media was on fire with theories. Abdication, a regency, a constitutional crisis. It didn't matter that no one had official answers yet. What mattered was the magnitude of silence. And in that silence, the world realized the monarchy as we know it was standing on the edge of something irreversible. From the early hours, the palace gates transformed into a global center of attention. International media outlets launched non-stop coverage, broadcasting live from every possible angle. The airwaves were filled with urgent headlines and serious speculation. Reporters spoke of unprecedented developments and historic tremors, their voices tinged with the same worry that had seeped through the palace walls. This wasn't the typical frenzy surrounding a royal wedding or state occasion. This was something different, something far more consequential. Online, the speculation reached a fever pitch. Hashtags like #RoyalCrisis and #FutureOfTheCrown began trending across continents. Every rumor, every subtle movement within the palace grounds was dissected, magnified, and debated by millions. From seasoned royal watchers to casual observers, everyone seemed to sense that history was tilting. The monarchy, usually so controlled and deliberate, had suddenly gone silent. And in that void, narratives were being written by those watching from the outside. Former palace insiders added to the intrigue with cryptic interviews, choosing their words carefully, but hinting at something huge. One described a planned but tragic revelation. Another spoke of a decision that's been building for months. Though none revealed specifics, their tone carried weight. These were individuals who had stood in hallways where history is whispered before it is spoken. Their choice to speak at all was enough to send waves of shock through an already restless public. Meanwhile, seasoned royal analysts began noting subtle but telling clues. The balcony appearances that usually signaled reassurance had been suddenly cancelled. The royal family's official social media accounts, normally quick to issue controlled statements in times of unrest, stayed eerily silent. Even minor events were being postponed or quietly removed from public calendars. For an institution where every movement is choreographed, these quiet disruptions felt like thunder. Public debate intensified. Television panels and social media threads became arenas for clashing visions of the monarchy's future. Some argued passionately for modernization, claiming the institution must evolve to survive. Others clung to tradition, fearing that too much change too quickly could erode the very identity of the crown. It was no longer a private royal matter. It had become a national and global conversation. The silence from Buckingham Palace wasn't calming anyone. It was fanning the flames of speculation. Then came the tipping point. All eyes turned toward an unexpected announcement from palace officials. The king would address the nation that very afternoon. The timing was deliberate. The decision to speak directly, bypassing the usual layers of formality and ceremony, signaled the seriousness of what was to come. Broadcasters across the world cleared their schedules. Commentators described the moment as potentially era-defining. Whatever the king said next would ripple far beyond the palace walls, reshaping not just the monarchy's present, but its future. And then, as the world held its breath, Buckingham Palace confirmed what everyone feared and hoped in equal measure. A live broadcast was coming. At exactly 5 p.m., the palace issued a statement. King Charles would address the nation. Cameras locked on Buckingham's gates as the royal crest appeared on screens across the world. When Charles finally appeared, there was no fanfare, no carriage, no trumpets, just a serious monarch facing history. His voice, steady yet fragile, carried the weight of centuries. What he revealed was not a mere update. It was the beginning of the monarchy's most dramatic transition in living memory. The air around the announcement carried a sense of finality. For days, silence and speculation had built like a storm gathering at the palace gates. Now, in a moment that would be replayed for generations, King Charles confirmed what many feared, but few dared to say out loud. His health, he explained, coupled with the rapidly changing world around him, had led him to a necessary but deeply tragic decision. Every word was measured. Every pause carried emotion. The monarch was not just addressing his people. He was unveiling a massive shift in the crown's future. Charles announced the formal start of a regency, effectively transferring major powers to Prince William. Though he kept his title as king, the day-to-day responsibilities and the legal weight of the throne would now rest with his son. It was a step no one had expected so soon. For a man who had waited a lifetime to take the throne, this choice was both shocking and deeply symbolic. His voice held steady, but those who knew him well sensed the weight of giving up power behind his carefully chosen phrases. In his address, he tried to frame the decision as more than personal. He called it not an end, but a renewal. He spoke of the monarchy's ability to adapt, to bend without breaking, to endure through changing times. Yet, even as he delivered these words, his eyes revealed a quiet sadness. The unmistakable pain of a man who had realized that the future might unfold without him at its center. This wasn't just a transition of power. It was a deeply human moment in which the monarch stepped back to let history move forward. Charles didn't shy away from difficult truths. In a rare display of vulnerability, he acknowledged mistakes of the past, recognizing the moments where the monarchy had stumbled and failed to meet the expectations of its people. It was a confession few monarchs have ever dared to make publicly. He then urged the nation to rally behind the next generation, emphasizing that William and Catherine represented the hope and stability the future demanded. The words carried both grace and urgency, a father passing the torch to his heir, not through ceremony, but through necessity. Yet one detail did not escape the public eye. Queen Camilla was noticeably absent from the broadcast. Her absence, unexplained and obvious, fueled an immediate wave of speculation. Was it an illness, disagreement, a silent acknowledgement of shifting power? Whatever the reason, her absence hung heavily over the moment. A symbol of deeper undercurrents within the royal family that had yet to fully surface. The speech ended not with grand declarations, but with a lingering silence. Charles paused, his gaze steady but heavy, allowing the weight of his words to settle over a nation and a watching world. That final moment, unspoken, raw, and deliberate, stunned viewers everywhere. It was the pause of a monarch stepping away from the spotlight and into history. But the shock of the announcement was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, a new royal order was already forming. Within hours of the announcement, power began to shift like tectonic plates beneath the monarchy. William's team took control of key communications. Catherine's role expanded overnight, becoming the monarchy's face of compassion and modernity. Meanwhile, Camilla's camp found itself increasingly pushed aside, their influence fading under the weight of a new narrative. The future wasn't coming. It had arrived. The transformation was swift and deliberate. Kensington Palace, once the secondary hub of royal operations, evolved into the monarchy's new strategic nerve center. Advisors, media liaisons, and senior assistants redirected their focus, recognizing that the gravitational pull of power had changed. Messages that would once have flowed through Charles's private office were now channeled through William's team. Policy coordination, press strategy, and public events all began to orbit around the Prince and Princess of Wales. It wasn't merely administrative. It was symbolic. The monarchy had subtly recentered itself without needing a formal announcement. William wasted no time asserting his new role. He called immediate briefings with military leaders, legal experts, and media strategists to ensure a seamless transition. These meetings weren't ceremonial. They were tactical. Behind the palace walls, William began laying out a vision for how the monarchy would operate under his leadership, ensuring stability while signaling that this was not business as usual. Officials described the atmosphere as focused and decisive. The heir to the throne was no longer preparing for the future. He was actively shaping it. Catherine, meanwhile, emerged as the emotional anchor of this new era. Within hours of the Regency announcement, she took on a series of carefully chosen events designed to project empathy, unity, and continuity. Her words were calm yet inspiring, her presence steadying a nation dealing with unexpected change. For many, she represented the bridge between cherished royal traditions and the evolving values of a modern Britain. It was no coincidence that her role expanded at the exact moment the monarchy needed a unifying figure. Her grace and quiet strength offered a reassuring contrast to the uncertainty swirling around the institution. While William and Catherine rose to prominence, Camilla's influence faded with startling speed. Her portraits, once prominently displayed in key offices and ceremonial spaces, were quietly removed or moved. It was a subtle but unmistakable signal. Her visibility was no longer central to the monarchy's narrative. Allies who had once championed her position found themselves on the edge of decision-making. Her absence during the king's announcement now appeared less like a temporary withdrawal and more like the beginning of a long, deliberate eclipse. Amid this power realignment, Princess Anne stepped into a crucial role as an advisor, acting as the bridge between the old guard and the emerging leadership. Her steady hand reassured traditionalists who feared the pace of change. Anne's presence gave legitimacy to the transition, signaling that the monarchy was not abandoning its roots, but carefully threading the past into the fabric of its future. Her support gave William's new leadership both moral weight and historical continuity. Then came the defining moment. The Diana Initiative, once a whispered project in palace hallways, was officially announced as the cornerstone of this new era. This initiative did more than honor the late princess's legacy. It strategically fused the emotional power of Diana's memory with the monarchy's future direction. By invoking her values, compassion, accessibility, and service, William and Catherine anchored their leadership in a legacy that commanded public devotion. It wasn't just a program. It was a declaration of intent. But even as the monarchy recalibrated, one question remained. Was this truly Charles's plan? Or had destiny forced his hand? The dust had barely settled when commentators called it the most consequential decision of the modern monarchy. In one tragic yet visionary announcement, Charles had rewritten the royal playbook. Some saw courage, others saw inevitability, but all agreed the monarchy would never be the same. The king's final act wasn't merely about stepping back. It was about ensuring the crown survived in a world that no longer guaranteed reverence. In the days following the announcement, debates ignited across media, political circles, and royal households. Analysts dissected every word of the king's address, questioning whether this monumental step had been truly voluntary, or a carefully orchestrated necessity forced by his health and mounting political realities. Some believed Charles had made a bold and selfless decision, choosing legacy over personal power. Others argued that he had been cornered by circumstance, by the pressures of modern scrutiny, shifting public sentiment, and the relentless pace of change that even a monarch could not resist. Regardless of motive, the outcome was undeniable. The monarchy had entered uncharted territory. Public sentiment shifted with breathtaking speed. Support for William and Catherine soared to unprecedented levels, framing them as symbols of hope, renewal, and modernity. Even minor events were being postponed or quietly removed from public calendars. For an institution where every movement is choreographed, these quiet disruptions felt like thunder. Public debate intensified. Television panels and social media threads became arenas for clashing visions of the monarchy's future. Some argued passionately for modernization, claiming the institution must evolve to survive. Others clung to tradition, fearing that too much change too quickly could erode the very identity of the crown. It was no longer a private royal matter. It had become a national and global conversation. The silence from Buckingham Palace wasn't calming anyone. It was fanning the flames of speculation. Then came the tipping point. All eyes turned toward an unexpected announcement from palace officials. The king would address the nation that very afternoon. The timing was deliberate. The decision to speak directly, bypassing the usual layers of formality and ceremony, signaled the seriousness of what was to come. Broadcasters across the world cleared their schedules. Commentators described the moment as potentially era-defining. Whatever the king said next would ripple far beyond the palace walls, reshaping not just the monarchy's present, but its future. And then, as the world held its breath, Buckingham Palace confirmed what everyone feared and hoped in equal measure. A live broadcast was coming. At exactly 5 p.m., the palace issued a statement. King Charles would address the nation. Cameras locked on Buckingham's gates as the royal crest appeared on screens across the world. When Charles finally appeared, there was no fanfare, no carriage, no trumpets, just a serious monarch facing history. His voice, steady yet fragile, carried the weight of centuries. What he revealed was not a mere update. It was the beginning of the monarchy's most dramatic transition in living memory. The air around the announcement carried a sense of finality. For days, silence and speculation had built like a storm gathering at the palace gates. Now, in a moment that would be replayed for generations, King Charles confirmed what many feared, but few dared to say out loud. His health, he explained, coupled with the rapidly changing world around him, had led him to a necessary but deeply tragic decision. Every word was measured. Every pause carried emotion. The monarch was not just addressing his people. He was unveiling a massive shift in the crown's future. Charles announced the formal start of a regency, effectively transferring major powers to Prince William. Though he kept his title as king, the day-to-day responsibilities and the legal weight of the throne would now rest with his son. It was a step no one had expected so soon. For a man who had waited a lifetime to take the throne, this choice was both shocking and deeply symbolic. His voice held steady, but those who knew him well sensed the weight of giving up power behind his carefully chosen phrases. In his address, he tried to frame the decision as more than personal. He called it not an end, but a renewal. He spoke of the monarchy's ability to adapt, to bend without breaking, to endure through changing times. Yet, even as he delivered these words, his eyes revealed a quiet sadness. The unmistakable pain of a man who had realized that the future might unfold without him at its center. This wasn't just a transition of power. It was a deeply human moment in which the monarch stepped back to let history move forward. Charles didn't shy away from difficult truths. In a rare display of vulnerability, he acknowledged mistakes of the past. Recognizing the moments where the monarchy had stumbled and failed to meet the expectations of its people. It was a confession few monarchs have ever dared to make publicly. He then urged the nation to rally behind the next generation, emphasizing that William and Catherine represented the hope and stability the future demanded. The words carried both grace and urgency, a father passing the torch to his heir. Not through ceremony, but through necessity. Yet one detail did not escape the public eye. Queen Camilla was noticeably absent from the broadcast. Her absence, unexplained and obvious, fueled an immediate wave of speculation. Was it an illness, disagreement, a silent acknowledgement of shifting power? Whatever the reason, her absence hung heavily over the moment, a symbol of deeper undercurrents within the royal family that had yet to fully surface. The speech ended not with grand declarations, but with a lingering silence. Charles paused, his gaze steady but heavy, allowing the weight of his words to settle over a nation and a watching world. That final moment, unspoken, raw, and deliberate, stunned viewers everywhere. It was the pause of a monarch, stepping away from the spotlight and into history. But the shock of the announcement was only the beginning. Behind the scenes, a new royal order was already forming. Within hours of the announcement, power began to shift like tectonic plates beneath the monarchy. William's team took control of key communications. Catherine's role expanded overnight, becoming the monarchy's face of compassion and modernity. Meanwhile, Camilla's camp found itself increasingly pushed aside, their influence fading under the weight of a new narrative. The future wasn't coming. It had arrived.